All right, so this is social workers' ethical responsibilities in practice settings. Okay, so this is going to be an even shorter video because this only has 10 sections and they're very short and they're pretty much self-explanatory. So the first section is supervision and consultation. Supervision and consultation. Um, Social workers who provide supervision or consultation should have the necessary knowledge and skills to supervise or consult appropriately and should do so only within their area of knowledge and competence. So if you're supervising someone, and by supervision or consultation, we mean uh, like if you are someone's field uh, preceptor, like if you have interns and things like that. If you have an intern or a volunteer or somebody like that, you are supervising them and they are particularly being supervised in the field of social work. Or if you are supervising um, employees or consulting employees who do social work, but they're not social workers. And there is a difference between a social worker and a case manager. And people often get our profession mixed up. People always think that social workers only work at DSS and take people's kids, which we know is not true. Or we call it DSS here, I'm sorry, Department of Social Services. Some people call it Department of Family and Children Services and other things like that. But people think that we take people's children. Um, just because someone is a case manager at an agency like that does not mean they're a social worker. You're only a social worker and can only claim and call yourself and use the title social worker if you are a licensed social worker. Um, Maybe if you have a master's degree in social work, but just because you have a bachelor's degree in psychology does not mean that you're a psychologist. Um, just because you have a master's degree in psychology does not mean you're a psychologist. And that always confused me because it's like, when do I say that I'm a social worker? And I was told when you're licensed as a social worker, you can use the title social worker. Although some people still call themselves social workers, but they're not. So just because you're a case manager at an agency does not mean that you are a social worker. You don't have the skills, the training, the competency, and all the knowledge and all the other stuff. So don't let people call people social workers who are not, because it looks bad on our profession if people don't have the skills and training. Anyway, I'm off on my soapbox. Okay. Um, Again, supervision and consultation. Make sure that when you are supervising or providing consultation, that you are responsible for setting clear, appropriate, and culturally sensitive boundaries. You should not engage in any dual or multiple relationships with your supervisees in which there is a risk of exploitation or potential harm to the supervisee. So, again, you don't want to date your supervisees, that kind of thing. Um, if you are supervising someone, make sure that your evaluation of their performance is that in which that is fair and respectful. Don't think because you're the licensed master social worker that you're above this person because they're trying to get to where you are and all that other stuff. Um, be fair and respectful, and don't kind of try to haze them, so to speak, try to make them get to where you are. Be respectful. Part two is education and training. Social workers who function as educators, field instructors for students or trainers should provide instruction only within their areas of knowledge and competence and should provide instruction based on the most current information and knowledge available in the profession. So don't go and teach things that are 50 years old unless we're talking about theories and things that were developed years and years ago. But if there is a certain model or therapy that was developed, let's say in 1970, but in 2001 they updated that therapy and included new and improved ways to do that therapy, you need to know the most current and up-to-date version of that therapy. Again, if you're an educator or field instructor for a student, you need to evaluate that student's performance in a manner that's fair and respectful. And you also want to be honest. You're not people's friends. People get that confused from my experience. Just because you have a student who is your intern and you may be close to that student, you still need to be fair, strict, not necessarily strict, but fair. You don't want to establish a friendship with your supervisee or your intern to the point where they think that, oh, well, Miss Ashley is going to give me an A because she likes me. Okay, yes, I do like you, and I want you to succeed, and that's why I'm going to be fair with you. And so if I think that you're not practicing correctly, I'm going to give you a fair evaluation, and I'm going to tell you, yeah, you are great at active listening, but your documentation is not up to par. So you need to be fair and accurate in your evaluation of students, interns, and things like that. Social workers who function as educators should not engage in any dual or multiple relationships that can pose a risk or harm to the student. And you're responsible again for setting boundaries. Part 3, performance evaluation. Social workers who have a responsibility for evaluating the performance of others should fulfill such responsibility in a fair and considerate manner and on the basis of clearly stated criteria. So if you're going to be evaluating someone's performance, a student, an employee, you need to have like a set, I think they call it a rubric if I'm not mistaken, but you need to have some kind of standard where you need to explain clearly stated criteria to your student or your intern or your supervisee. This is what I'm looking for when I'm going to evaluate you. Let them read it, make sure they understand what you're going to be looking for, be clear, and then grade them on that. Don't let up, because we want to have competent, knowledgeable, ethical social workers, and that's why we have to be fair and accurate, but not mean and hateful and stern and all that other stuff. Part 4, client records. Social workers should take reasonable steps to ensure that documentation and records is accurate and reflects the services provided. Oh my gosh. Documentation is key. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. But don't write down stuff that didn't happen. So don't make up stuff to try to cover yourself. You need to learn accountability and take responsibility for things. I'll give you an example. I had a lady, her boyfriend was beating on her. I talked to her mom. Her mom had the same last name as she did. That was the only name I had. So I called her up. I said, may I speak to Miss Such and Such? She said, this is her. I was talking to her thinking that she was the actual victim, but she wasn't. She was the victim's mom. And I asked her about her pregnancy. And she was like, I'm not pregnant. And then she was like, you must want to speak with my daughter. And I'm like, uh-oh. And I just told the mom that the daughter is pregnant by the guy who was beating on her. But I thought I was talking to the daughter the whole time. And I was like, please don't tell her that I told you. But I still had to write in my notes that I did disclose unknowingly to the mom that the daughter is pregnant. And that was something that could come up if the daughter found out that the mom found out from me that she was pregnant. It's something that could come up that I may or may not get in trouble for. But I had to take accountability for that. And I did put in the record that I told her that she was pregnant. But I didn't know that I was talking to the mom and not the daughter. So write down every single thing. I'm the kind of person that writes stuff down verbatim. When I'm on the phone with a client or a victim, or if I'm doing case management with a victim, with a client, I'm sorry. Used to saying client, but now I'm used to saying victim because of my work that I do now. But if I'm on the phone with a client or face-to-face doing case management with a client or doing anything, I pretty much try to write verbatim. And you don't have to write verbatim all the time. You can do a summary as they're talking or however you want to do it. But it's good to include quotes in your documentation from the client. But if you're going to quote, make sure it's actual word for word what the client said. Document, document, document. I can't say it enough. Make sure you document everything. I document specific times, dates that I called somebody, what the conversation was about, verbatim pretty much, and I do quotes of what they said. You need to learn to document everything, okay? Social workers should include sufficient and timely documentation and records to facilitate the delivery of services and to ensure continuity of services provided to the clients in the future. Make sure you keep your records and you keep them in a timely manner. You make sure that you submit them to whatever database you use or whatever, however you keep records. Make sure that they're there and that they're accurate for whoever may need to refer to them in the future. Social workers' documentation should protect the client's privacy to the extent that it's possible and appropriate, and should only include information that is directly relevant to the service delivery of services. So again, you may use numbers to identify clients. You may use letters or code words or whatever. Don't use full social security numbers. Whenever possible, don't use the client's full name. And don't take documents home unless that's part of your job. Someone that I know had her car broken into and she had her case file of documents with notes and stuff and information on clients, and all of that was stolen. So who knows what the person who stole it did with all of that information. Let's see. Social workers should store records following the termination of services and ensure reasonable future access. Records should be maintained for the number of years required by state statutes or relevant contracts. Again, when you terminate services, you need to make sure that you dispose of the records according to your agency's policies or whatever the state's policies are. And a lot of agencies and states require that you keep records for a minimum of 7 years. Some go 10 years or less than 7. It just depends on your agency and your state. You need to know what that number of years are because it needs to be accessed or the potential to access it in the future in case there's a subpoena or there's the client comes back 2 years later for whatever reason and you need to see what happened with that client. So after termination, make sure that you store your files, hard copies or electronic, however your agency does it. Point 5 is billing. You should establish and maintain billing practices that accurately reflect the nature and extent of services provided and that identify who provided the service in the practice setting. So if you're independent, you need to make sure that you're charging people a fair amount and is reasonable to the nature of the services that you provide. If you're practicing within a group of people, y'all need to come up with some kind of contract or something that says who provided the services, how much they're going to be paid, and the client needs to know beforehand how much they're going to be charged. Point 6, client transfer. When you're transferring clients to another agency or someone is referring a client over to your agency, you need to make sure you're not duplicating services. You need to talk with the client about the implications, including the possible risks and benefits of entering a relationship with a new service provider. So make sure if you're doing some kind of therapy with a client, you don't refer them somewhere where they are getting the same kind of therapy from someone else. Or, somebody's referring them to you, you need to make sure that you need to know what all services that agency or that person is providing to the client so that you don't duplicate those services. And you need to let the client know the risks and benefits of having 2 or more agencies help them. Administration. This is if you are over or supervising in an agency. You need to make sure that you advocate within and outside the agency for adequate resources to meet the client's needs. You need to make sure that all the resources are available, that they're open and fair. When your client's needs are not met, you need to make sure that you find a way to make their needs met. What else? And if you work for an agency, social work administrators should take reasonable steps to ensure that the working environment for which they are responsible is consistent with and encourages compliance of the NASW Code of Ethics. And administrators should take reasonable steps to eliminate any conditions in their organizations that violate, interfere with, or discourage compliance with the code. So wherever you're working, you need to make sure that their goals and their values and things are consistent with the code of ethics, because you're a social worker and you need to make sure that that is an ethical agency or organization. Point 8, continuing education and staff development. You, as an administrator, need to make sure that you are arranging for continuing education for your staff and professional development. All that needs to be available for your staff. So you need to make sure that you find things that are relevant, that's going to make your staff competent in the area of expertise that you all provide services for. You need to make sure that your staff is continuing to grow and progress so that you can help clients help themselves. And point 9, commitment to employers. You should generally adhere to the commitments made to employers and employing organizations. You need to improve your employing agency's policies and procedures and the efficiency and effectiveness of their services. So a lot of agencies have the mindset of, we do what we have always done. Well, if you come in with new ideas, express those and see if you can get some things changed if you see that they're not working, or that things can be better. But if they don't want to change things, sometimes it's out of your control, but at least you tried. Social workers should take reasonable steps to ensure that employers are aware of social workers' ethical obligations as set forth in the NASW Code of Ethics and the implications of those obligations for social work practice. So if you're going to work for an agency, they need to know that you are a social worker, that you're licensed, and that you have these set of standards and values that you need to abide by, and that that they're fine with that. Social workers should not allow an employing organization's policies, procedures, regulations, or administrative orders interfere with their ethical practice of social work. Social workers should take reasonable steps to ensure that their employing agency's practices are consistent with the NASW Code of Ethics. So, all the stuff that we're talking about now, wherever you work, they need to be in line with all of this, basically, is what it's saying. If they're not, you need to remove yourself from that agency if possible. I'm not telling you to quit your job or whatever, but you need to work for places that are gonna allow you to abide by these standards, is basically what I'm saying. And like it says, you should take reasonable steps to ensure that they are practicing consistently with the Code of Ethics. Okay, you can read all the rest of that your own. Labor management disputes. This is one thing that I'm really not 100% clear on. Social workers may engage in organized action, including the formation of and participation in labor unions to improve services to clients and working conditions. That makes sense. If you want to join an organization or a committee that is going to better our profession, and help our clients and our working conditions, then that's fine. The actions of social workers who are involved in labor management disputes, job actions, and labor strikes should be guided by the profession's values and ethical principles and ethical standards. Read over that part. That's 3.10, labor management disputes, part B or letter B. Make sure you read over that and understand what that's saying, because we don't have labor unions and strikes and stuff like that. So if you do, make sure you read that for yourself and try to get an understanding of that. Okay, so that's it for part 3, and I'll be back with part 4.